Good morning and welcome. My name is Dustin Avey and I serve as the chair of the Untitled Chamber of Commerce Business to Government Advocacy Committee. It's my honor of you to interview Adam Thomas today in regards to his run for the House District number 26. The Johnson County Public Policy Council, comprised of 10 chambers of commerce serving Johnson County, developed today's questions focusing on business and community issues. Before we get started, I wanted to give listeners a little background on House District number 26. The district jigsaws to the north between 151st and 159th Streets, and the southern border goes to 215th Street. The western border is 169, and the eastern border is Flum. A little background on Adam before we get started. He is the Republican candidate for the district. He has been in over 30 years attending Olathe High School. And so he's lived in Olathe over 30 years attending Olathe High School and now lives with his wife and their 4 daughters and a son. Adam knows the area and has tremendous growth and continues to keep developing. He wants to ensure the community and its deep faith, strong communities and safe neighborhoods. His professional career is in restaurant management, but enjoys serving Olathe citizens in a variety of roles, which was what inspired him to run for the state representative for District number 26. So I think what we'll do first is we'll have Adam maybe give an opening statement and then we'll get into some of the questions.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all for doing this. It's an honor to be here. It's always good to be able to sit in the room and talk about issues that we're facing. I think the last 4 years have been an honor. It's been wonderful to serve the people of Olathe and Spring Hill, and now I welcome my new friends in Overland Park that we will be representing after November 8th. The main focuses that I'm running on this year is we have to talk about the large elephant in the room, inflation. We need to talk about families coming home and spending more money than they have before on basic needs. And so we have to consider relief for those families and for those workers. We talk about small businesses. We're coming out of COVID, and they were crippled, some of them, by some of the occurrences during COVID. And so we have to consider what's happened to our small businesses and how we can help them and give them some sort of relief. It was very nice to get the food sales tax passed. That's going to have real effects on people at home. And that's sort of what I always try to do is when I take a vote or when I push a policy, my thought process is how is this going to affect everyday people, folks at home, local businesses, people who want to start businesses. And so that's always been my passion. If you go back and look at my voting record, I have a strong record on that. I appreciate all the work that the Chamber has done and the ways we've worked together. I also sit on Education Committee. I believe our children are our future. They're our future leaders. So one of them will probably be sitting in this chair one day interviewing with one of us for this position. And we've got to make sure they're all set up for success and they're learning. And we have to also make sure that they have the tools to be successful both now and in the future. So I'll continue to focus on education and good policies regarding that.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for giving us a little background on why you're running. We're now going to get into some question and answer. Obviously, we want to limit it about 1.5 minutes per question, if that's fine.
Okay.
Okay with you. First question, I think something that you stated in your opening comment was just tax policy. So what are your views on state tax policy and being as specific as you can?
I believe, first and foremost, the food sales tax with the surplus we had was absolutely necessary. It was great to work on that. I know we've passed it twice before since I've been in office, but this year we got it across the finish line, and it was great because it brings relief to families, and that's who we represent. I mean, this is, every 2 years it's a job interview. We talk to families, we meet with people, and they decide whether or not we're worth supporting and whether or not we get the job. So I think tax policies, anytime you can decrease the burden on families and businesses, I think that's great, and that's our job. Our job should not be how can we get more out of these people, how can we spend more money on certain projects that maybe I want to get done or other legislators want to get done. We have to think about the people we represent and how we can affect them. So voting consistently to cut taxes, food sales tax was a big deal, and we're super glad that that passed and that the governor signed it, and we're going to continue to consider tax policies and how we can reduce them.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
So really education was a passion of yours, being I think probably that's where we first interacted, was on the House Education Committee. So second question, related to education, what are your views on K-12 education funding and accessibility?
I have always supported and will continue to support anything that makes it easier for our children to learn, whether in the capacity that they're in or in a different capacity. I'm fortunate enough to represent Spring Hill. They have one of the best virtual schools in the state. One of the issues that came up this year was the risk of accreditation because they were taking on students that were credit deficient seniors from other districts like KCK, Lawrence, Topeka, districts like that where some students may be underperforming through no fault of their own. So they agree to take these students on, and in the meantime, it impacts their graduation rate, which drops. So what we did was we passed in the big education bill, which I happily supported, that creates a new graduation rate to exclude credit deficient students. So not only does it help Spring Hill specifically in all virtual schools with their graduation rates, it also ensures that they don't get disheartened by the potential loss of accreditation and still continue to do the right thing, which is give these students every opportunity to be successful. The education bill we passed this year also went above constitutional levels of funding, and the governor signed it. It was a great effort, and I'm very, very proud of the work we did on that, and specifically the impact we made on the people of the district that I represent.
Thank you. So maybe shifting gears a little bit regarding economic development, obviously there have been a lot of things happening in Johnson County and something that I think all chambers in Johnson County are really focused on. What types of economic development policies do you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
I think it all starts with taxes. I think it all starts with being friendly to businesses who want to come here. I think anytime a business chooses Kansas, we have to be open, be willing to give them the tools they need to be successful. I think it starts with smart tax policy. I really do.
Next question. So economic development really, there's a strong focus on just workforce and where we are, not only in Kansas, but really in the country related to this workforce and development. What would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce?
I think it starts with the Department of Labor. I think we need to reform some of the happenings that went on there. I mean, we're facing the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud. I think you start there and sort of work your way from there to the local levels, work with local city and municipality officials. What I don't want to see is more regulation, more government involvement, more state government sort of calling all the shots. I want the locals to take control and sort of use us to help them bring more businesses here, whether that's, I know like with the food sales tax, for example, it's not going to zero. There's still state and county taxes that'll be on your food. So I would encourage the county to take action to bring more businesses here as well, while in the meantime, we focus on keeping tax policies better at the state level and making Kansas more friendly for businesses.
Next question, and kind of this shifting maybe back to a little bit of education, but maybe post-secondary, that's like K-12. What are your views on the state's role with respect to ensuring access and affordability of post-secondary education?
I think the state needs to make sure they're doing everything we can to make it accessible. I think the issue I have right now is the federal government's involvement in student loans. I think the issue with that is once it becomes federally insured, prices go up. Who pays for that? We the people, we the taxpayers. So I think the government needs to stay out of that and leave that up to local control.
So I think the last 2 years, I would say very unprecedented in terms of just the COVID-19 pandemic, and kind of I think there's a lot of perspective looking backwards to kind of, you know, what some of the key takeaways related to that experience. So question number 6 really relates to that, and so what do you believe that the takeaways for the state lawmakers should be from the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think the first thing we need to talk about is leaving it up to the local businesses to decide their best policies. I think a blanket policy by the state government is a mistake. Different areas face different scenarios. There's different levels of infection the entire process through COVID. And what did we do? We tried with this blanket policy of shutting down all businesses and saying you're essential, you're not. So Walmart can stay open, but a little mattress store owned by a local businessman can't because he's not essential. I think the business owners need to make the call, and they need to be in contact with their local officials, and that's where the decision needs to be made, not a blanket policy from the state government. I think that's too much government involvement.
Okay, thank you for that. So kind of on the same lines with just healthcare in general, what are your views on healthcare policy and Medicaid expansion?
I think Medicaid expansion in its current form is a mistake. I think anytime you expand a government program, number one, the price on it keeps changing, so we don't know. And there's several aspects. I've spoken to the governor's office about this. I had a meeting with them. My issue is I asked the question, about able-bodied people, and the response I typically get is, well, maybe you don't want people to have access to health care. That's not the question. What I'm saying is that when you expand a government program, more people will take advantage of it. The program in and of itself, in its current design, is designed for people who need it. We need a program for those people. What we don't need to do is expand it to people who don't need it that might take advantage of the system. My other issue is with it, the federal government contributes 90%, we contribute 10% to Medicaid right now. So that number changes annually. It can change any time. When I bring up not only the able-bodied piece of it, but when I bring up the government dropping that contribution rate to say 85, 80, 79, wherever, our price goes up. And so what I'm often told when I have this conversation is, well, they're not going to lower the contribution rate at the federal level. It changes every year. So until those questions get legitimate answers and we put fail-safe something in place to make sure that people aren't gaming the system and it's used for the right reasons, and we make adjustments in case the feds adjust the rate, I can't support it in its current form.
Thank you for that response.
Sure.
Last question for you, and this is, I think you've touched on this several times through various responses. We'll talk a little bit about how control over decision-making is divided among the state legislature and local governments on issues such as taxation, economic development, and education. And then what are your views on this issue?
I think any time you can leave it up to local control is a good thing. For example, we didn't regulate any sort of local food sales tax or anything. We did a state food sales tax. We left it up to local control. I built a great relationship with the school boards in Olathe and Spring Hill. I talk to them constantly. There's a lot of times we discuss policy and they take action, and my goal is to not force anything upon them, but let them make the local decisions. I think anytime the government gets involved, it gets tricky, it gets sticky. The locals need to have control of their decision-making process, because what works in Olathe may not work in Garden City. What works in Overland Park might not work in Hayes. So we need to be more dependent on the locals to control local decisions and have the state more or less be the overseer. But the one-size-fits-all approach in general, I've often found is just not successful.
Thank you for answering all those questions.
Sure.
So I know we'll give you kind of just your 2-minute kind of final wrap-up and closing statement.
Sure. So moving forward, I know I touched on this earlier, the biggest passion that I have is children and education. So I have 5 children. One graduated recently, one is 4 years old and hasn't decided what he wants to do yet with his life, but we'll get to that later on. So setting them up to be successful is key. I spent 2 months of the last school year in the classroom as an emergency substitute teacher, and these kids, they want to be read to, they want to be taught, they want to learn. And so I think we have to focus on our children and how we're raising them, and we need to remember that per the Constitution, the upbringing of our children falls on the responsibility of the parent. And so we need to make sure parents have access to what their children are learning. Parents need to get more involved. Kids need to put their cell phones down and go out in the yard and play a little bit more, I feel like. But my passion will continue to be with education. I'm looking forward to getting back on the Education Committee and the K-12 Committee. I think we also need to focus on easing the burden on everyday families and taxpayers. We've got a record of doing that, and I think that will continue. So those are going to be my priorities in this upcoming session, will be education, raising our children right, and then also focusing on families and taxpayers.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining
Sure.
us today, Adam, and all your responses. This does conclude our forum for House District number 26 on behalf of the Olathe Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to everyone for taking advantage of this opportunity to learn about Adam in House District number 26. We are adjourned.